What is reading really? And what do we mean by reading? I'm sure, as my listeners, most of you do read books, and most of us do take reading for granted. And it's only when we are involved in teaching someone else to read, then we may realize what a strange and complex process or series of processes this reading is. The neurology or neuropsychology of reading remains a very primitive field at this stage. And it's not really surprising because reading is a complex phenomenon. It can have complex effects on us. These effects can be frightening, spiritual, emotional, erotic, motivating, entertaining, informative, and enlightening. If you go deeper into understanding this phenomenon, it gets more interesting. Like where and with whom we read, it also affects how we understand and respond to our reading. So for a very long period, most people in the history, they were read to. And in fact, this is the situation right now as we grow up. As children, this may be our first introduction to the written word. And we may read at the same time as being read to, following the text while listening to it being read. And this is what happens in religious ceremonies or in general religious settings. Because religions also use these tools of teaching. But as we grow up and we go to schools and universities and we start reading in different places, it kind of becomes a part of our personality. For example, we may choose to conceal what we are reading, or sometimes we may choose to flaunt it. We might want to suggest it to other people what our interests are, what is our political ideology, or what education or cultural awareness we have, all these things. Reading in this sense acts as a powerful symbol of our own identities. And going back to religions, this is pretty much you see with the religions of the book. They are very much obsessed with this idea where you keep the book with you and you identify with it. And if you start noticing the diversity of reading, you'll be equally surprised. Like how people read. Some people read one thing at a time. Some people, like me, we read multiple sources or many books at a time. Some of us read very quickly. Some go for meditative kind of experience when reading, one word at a time, very slowly. And if you think about it, what are we doing really when we are reading a book or text? We are quickly decoding certain codes and creating those images in our head. And it happens very fast. In fact, so fast and so unconsciously, we don't recognize it. We just read and the process is very natural. Things keep transferring from the book to our head and we keep painting those pictures in our head. That way, if you think about it, we don't read only print and the books. We read landscapes, facial expressions, tea leaves, mathematical formula, the future, and all kind of things we see around. Because we see something, we interpret it, and we create a picture in our head. That's essentially what we do. And we are doing that constantly as we look around. In fact, you can try that. Try this right now. Look around, see an object, and there is an object out there. There's a picture of it in your mind. It might trigger certain other thoughts, which may lead to certain other thoughts. That's precisely what text does. So while we do talk about literal reading, which is you read a text and there is a literal meaning, there's also the metaphorical text. And that is where reading gets more interesting, it gets more joyous. And once again, it's in the religious scriptures domain, you find these kind of texts very frequently. And that is why we differentiate between information and knowledge. Because information is something, the literal text, what it is saying, but knowing is more than a matter of being able to read. It's going to the other realm. What do we create out of it? How do we link it, map it with the other knowledge we have? How do we understand it better? That's really knowledge. And that is something most of us aspire for as we read more and more books. And if you notice these different kind of texts, you will find that these can be read in different ways. For example, if you were to recite poetry or a song, it's much better to have a group of people around you and you sing it in chorus. But if let's say you're reading some kind of novel, you'd prefer to sit separately and get absorbed in that world. In some cases, if you're reading philosophy, you might want to go through each one of those arguments and then discuss them with somebody else. So these different reading texts, these different books, different kinds of works, they can be read in different ways. But in all these cases, all kinds of reading, the universal or common truth is that they are based on language and the use of language, the correct use of language. Then only we can interpret the information correctly, what the author is trying to say. And that's why it's very important to understand the language well. And that is how you can also assess the writers sometimes. Because a good writer would be someone who would know what exactly he or she is meaning by their words, what they are trying to say. A bad writer perhaps would not know exactly and might, without his or her own awareness, slip in a word without really meaning that, and the reader will have some kind of confusion. And that's why if you participate in book clubs or any discussions that happen around books, you'll find that different people may have different interpretations of different ideas in books, but as they decipher the text and they discuss it, they can form some uniform ideas and come to some kind of conclusion. But this can only happen when the writer was really skillful with the use of language. And that itself, the whole process is quite stimulating for the mind. After all, reading is both a physical as well as a mental activity. It stimulates those neurological pathways, and to some extent it remains mystery, and at the same time physically you're paying attention through your eyes, or in some cases these days as you're listening to an audiobook, you're paying attention through your ears. So you receive the information, process it in your head, how the patterns of languages have been made in your head. According to them, you judge the new information, and then you quickly interpret the data. But whichever reading you do and whatever way you read, you would agree that it's a joyous exercise and it's something that we all look forward to. So the next time you pick a book or you're reading any text, do pay attention to this whole process of reading and what exactly you're doing while reading that text.